Masechet Menaḥot, Daf Yod Gimel. We begin the second perek. Mishnah teaches Hakomeset hamincha leechol sheyareha o laktir kumsa lemachar moder biyoseh bazeh shehu pigol vechayavin alav karet. We learned the basic law of this in the previous perek, but now we're going to learn that there's a machloket about it. If the kohen does the kemitzah of the mincha, having in mind that he's going to eat the remainder or burn the kometz tomorrow, that's outside the time, then even Rabbi Yosef agrees in this case that is pigul and one is liable to karet. So this was assumed in the previous perek, as stated anonymously. Now we're saying even Rabbi Yosef agrees with this. Well, we'll see why Rabbi Yosef, we might think he disagrees. Laktir levona lemachar. Rabbi Yosef omer, pasul ve'en bo karet, chachamim omrim, pigol v'chayvin alav karet. Here's why. Because if he did the kemitzah, having in mind that he's going to burn levonata, the levona that comes along with the korban mincha. For a typical korban mincha, you have to burn two things, the kometz and the levona. Both of them are the matirim. You have to burn both of them in order for the remainder of flour to be permitted to eat by the kohanim. And so, if he does the kemitzah having in mind that he's going to burn the levona outside the time tomorrow, Rabbi Yosef says that in this case, although it's pasul, there is no karet. Chachamim say it's pigul and one is liable to karet. So Chachamim say that you can make something pigul either by having intention for the kometz to burn it outside the time or the levona to burn it outside the time. It's the same thing, which makes sense. Both of them are matirim. So, but Rabbi Yosef makes a difference between them. The rabbis ask, Amru lo, mashina zeh min hazebach. So what's the difference between the case of a korban mincha and an animal sacrifice? Animal sacrifice, the same thing. If you have in mind, when you're doing shechita, that you're going to sprinkle the blood. Sprinkling the blood, in the case of animal sacrifice, is the matir. Once you sprinkle the blood, then the rest of the korban, if it's chatat, then the kohanim can eat the edible parts and the sacrificial parts can be put on the mizbeach. So that's the matir for everything else. And so this should be the same thing, that if you have intention to burn the matir after the time, then it should be pigul, and that should apply equally to the kometz and the levona. Why are you distinguishing between the two when it comes to a korban mincha? Amar lehen shazevach damo b'saro ve'emurav echad ulvona ena min mincha. Rabbi Yosef answers and explains that when it comes to an animal sacrifice, it's blood and it's flesh, the part that will be permitted for kohanim to eat, or if it's a kadeshim kalim for people to eat. And emurav, the parts that get burnt on the mizbeach, all of them are one. They're all part of the same animal. They're all connected together, and therefore one will affect the other. However, for a levona, that's not from the mincha. So this explains why it makes a distinction between the kometz and the levona. The kometz is originally all part of the same flour. You have one big bowl of flour, and then he takes from that flour a kometz. So it's all part of the same thing. Therefore, it's more deeply connected, and having in mind during the kemitzah that you're going to burn the flour outside the time, will make all the flour pigul. However, the levona, although it's in the bowl, but it's a separate item, it's not part of the flour. You don't do the kemitzah from the levona. And so, if you have in mind to burn at the time of kemitzah, to burn the levona outside the time, it is pasul, but since it's not of the same material as the rest of the mincha offering, it is not pigul. Gemara asks, Lamali limitna moder Rabbi Yosef bazo. It's an unusual form of the Mishnah that says Rabbi Yosef agrees before it even tells us what he disagrees about. So why does he have to say Rabbi Yosef agrees? If he agrees, just say everyone says. Just don't say. Don't quote Rabbi Yosef at all. Just quote the halacha that if someone has in mind during the kemitzah to eat the remainder outside, to burn the kometz tomorrow, then it's no good and it's karet. And so just don't quote anybody at all, and then you'll know that everybody agrees. And the answer is we want to quote Rabbi Yosef. Even Rabbi Yosef agrees here because of the sefa. Mishum dekaba edmit na sefa laktir lebonata lemachar. Rabbi Yosef omer pasul ve'en bo karet. Because we're going to see that he disagrees with regard to levona. If he does kemitzah having in mind that he's going to burn the levona tomorrow, Rabbi Yosef says pasul but no karet. מהודתמה תעמד רבי יוסי משום דקסבד אין מפגלים בחסי מתיר. We might have thought, if we just had this part of the sefa, that the reasoning of the Rabbi Yosef is because that you don't cause pigul with half a matir. In order for the remainder of the flour to be fully permitted, you need two things. You have to burn the chometz and the levona. And so it could be another opinion that says it doesn't cause pigul unless you burn both, unless you have in mind to burn both the matirim, the chometz and the levona, and outside the time, then it will become pigul and liable to karet. But if it's only one or the other, then not so. And according to that, even in the Resha, Rabbi Yosef would disagree. So if we only had the sefer, we said, oh, you know why? He says when you have in mind to burn the levona outside the time, it's not pigul, because it's only one out of two things. And therefore also in the Resha, if he has in mind to burn the chometz outside the time, but doesn't have anything wrong in mind regarding the levona, then also it will not be liable to karet, because it's only one out of two. So therefore, it needs to tell us in the Resha, Kamash Malante, that Rabbi Yosef, his reasoning is not because it's one out of two. It actually depends on which one it is. When it comes to the chometz, that's of the same substance as the rest of the flour. So having in mind to burn the chometz, just by itself, that is enough to make it chayav karet. But the levona by itself is not sufficient to make it liable to karet because it's from a different substance. So now quoting the sefer, that if he has in mind to burn the levona tomorrow, Rabbi Yosef says, although it's pasul, no karet in this case. Amar Lakish, Omer hayad Rabbi Yosef, en matir mefagel et hamatir. Resh Lakish quotes Rabbi Yosef saying that one matir does not cause pigul to another matir. In other words, if you had in mind, while burning the chometz, I'm going to burn the levona tomorrow, or the other way around. While burning the levona, he says in mind, I'm going to burn the chometz tomorrow. That does not make it pigul, because that's one matir to another matir. It would only be if while he's burning the chometz, he has in mind, I'm going to eat the remainder tomorrow. In that case, that would be pigul. So yes, a matir can cause pigul to that which is permitted, but one matir does not cause pigul to another matir. Here's another example. When you have lechem hapanim, there's two bowls of levona. And you have to offer both of them, burn both of them, so that the bread will then be permitted for kohanim to eat. Now, let's say you have to burn them one at a time. So let's say he takes one and he burns them. He burns the first one. And then he has in mind, while he's burning the first bowl of levona, that he's going to burn the second one tomorrow. Then it does not become, the bread does not become pigul, because the same thing. Both of these are matirim. Mai v'chen ata omer. Now we wonder, how come Resh Lakish had to give two examples for Rabbi Yosef? One from a case of a regular korban, and one from the two bazichim. Why do you have to add that one also? Ma'odetem atamad Rabbi Yosef balebona mishum delav mina deminchahi aval b'shne baziche lebona demina dehadadeninu ema mefagili hadadeh kamashmalan. Why? Because I might have thought that the reasoning of Rabbi Yosef in the case of the first case, so when you have a regular korban mincha, and he tells us that if you have in mind during the burning of the chometz that you're going to burn the levona tomorrow, while you're burning levona, you're going to burn the chometz tomorrow. There, it's not of the same type. It's not of the same substance. So there, maybe that's why he says that one matir does not make the other matir pigul. However, when it comes to two bowls of levona, they're the same substance. They're both levona. They're both frankincense. I might think that, according to the Rabbi Yosef, they're more deeply connected, and the wrong intent during the burning of one bowl would make the other one pigul, and that's why he says v'chen omer, so that you know that in this case, there's a general rule: one matir does not make the other matir pigul, even if it's of the same substance. וממסית אמר תמד רבי יוסף אלבונה, לאו משום דלאו מינה דמנחה היא, והקטני ספה אמרו לו, מה שינתה מן הזבח? אמר להן, הזבח תמו בשרו ומורב אחד ובנה אינה מן המנחה. Now we ask, can you say really that the reasoning of Rabbi Yosef regarding the Levona is not because it's not of the same substance. It says in the Sefa, when the rabbis asked, well, how is this case of Korban Mincha different from an animal sacrifice? And he answered, when it comes to an animal sacrifice, the blood and the permissible meat and the meat that has to be sacrificed is all of one substance, but the levona is not of the same substance as the mincha. So clearly, he does have that reasoning. So then, how come you said, oh, we might think that, according to the Bioseh, the one matir does not make the other matir prohibited. That's only because it's a mincha of a different substance. But if it's the same substance, then I would say not. So that's why he teaches us that he doesn't think so. That he doesn't think that being the same substance makes a difference. But actually, he said in the Mishnah itself that makes all the difference. Not being the same substance is completely different than being the same substance. So how could you say that? How could you reject that reasoning if that is in fact the reasoning that he said in the Mishnah? Mai ena min hamincha. So now the Gemara explains, what did we mean when Rabbi Yosef said ena min hamincha in the Mishnah? In his response to the rabbis, he wasn't simply saying that the frankincense is of a different substance to the flour because it's not made out of flour. Rather, he was making a more substantial distinction between animal sacrifices and mincha sacrifices. When it comes to animal sacrifices, the sprinkling of the blood, that does two things. Once you sprinkle the blood, then you can eat the meat and you can burn the sacrificial parts on the mizbeach. So it's the one act that's a matir for two different things. The one act of sprinkling the blood lets you then put other things on the mizbeach, the sacrificial parts, and also eat the meat. That is fundamentally different from a korban mincha, where we're not considering that the kometz has to be done first before you can burn the frankincense. That's not true. You can burn the kometz or the frankincense, either one, first or second. That's the point that he's making here. So what it means when it says frankincense is not ena min hamincha means ena beikuv mincha. It's not dependent on the permission of the mincha. It's not the same as the fact that the leftover, the remainder, is prevented from being eaten until the kometz is burnt. In that case, it's true. Until you burn the kometz, you cannot eat the shirayim. And it's not that. So too, burning of the kometz prevents you from burning the levona. That's not true, although that is the way it is in an animal sacrifice, where the sprinkling of the blood then lets you, number one, eat the meat, and number two, burn the emurim. But in a korban mincha, it's not the same format. It's not that the burning of the kometz allows you to eat the remainder and burn the levona. Not true. Ela iba'e hai maktar beresha, v'iba'e hai maktar beresha. Rather, if he wants, he can burn the kometz first, or he can burn the levona first. Not like an animal sacrifice where you can't burn the emurim before you sprinkle the blood. And so that's what he meant in the Mishnah when he said, no, there's a fundamental difference between animal sacrifices and, in this case, of mincha offerings. In animal sacrifice, indeed, there's only one matir. The sprinkling of the blood is the matir for the meat and the emurim. But in the case of a korban mincha, what he meant is that the frankincense is not part of the leftover of the mincha. It's not like the leftover that has one matir for two things, but rather has two matirim. And therefore, if you burn, according to the Bioseh, if he has in mind during the Kemisah that he's going to burn the levona outside the time, that's not pigul, because the levona is an independent matir. That's what he meant over there in the Mishnah, and so that's not the same as the meaning here when he was talking about one matir not permitting another matir, and we said we might have made a distinction between kometz and levona versus the case of 2 spoons of levona. There, it's one is not min hamincha, and the other is the same substance. Okay, so there, what he meant is actually, is it a different substance? Maybe that's why one's not matir for another. But here, de mina de hada de ninhu. Here means literally that it's the same substance. It's the same. They're both frankincense. So here he means it. He meant it literally. but that's not the same meaning as in the Mishnah. So this was good because now we clarified exactly what he meant in the Mishnah. V'Rabbanan. Now we want to turn to Rabbanan. They disagree with this statement that Rabbi Yosef, Resh Lakish said in the name of Rabbi Yosef, that one matir does not make another matir pigul. Rabbanan thinks that it would make it pigul if you, in the case of a korban mincha, if you have in mind while you're burning the komets that you're going to burn the levona outside the time, then it is in fact pigul. So Rabbanan, how can they explain their reasoning? Don't they agree with the general principle that one matir is not going to make pigul another matir? They do say that, but only regarding this case of animal sacrifices of the korban. You have two korban shalamims that are brought on Shavuot with sheteh halechem, and the law is the kohanim cannot eat sheteh halechem until both of those korban shalamims are offered. So in a way, that's also two matirim. You need both of them to be offered. Although in the case of korban shalamim, each one is an independent korban shalamim that has its own matir. You have to sprinkle the blood of shalamim A, so that you can continue doing the rest of the service for that shalamim, and similar to B. So they each have their own matirim, but they also are both matirim for the shtei halechem. In that case, Rabbanan agree that en matir mefagel ta matir. If he does shechita for kebes A, and having in mind he's going to eat the other kebes outside the time, that in that case, en matir mefagel et matir, it's okay. The other one will not be pigul. But that's different. You know why? In that case, they were not established in one bowl. They're two independent animals, two independent korbanot. So they're not going to cause pigul to one another. But in the case of a mincha offering, where both of them are placed and sanctified in one bowl, you put the flour and the frankincense in one bowl before you do the kemitzah. So therefore, it's all one. And therefore, the rabbis say in the case of a korban mincha, having in mind during the burning of the kemitzah that he's going to burn the levona outside the time, in fact, would make it pigul. Now we introduce a new halacha. Amar Rabbi Yanai, likut levona bezar pasul. Rabbi Yanai says that the gathering of the frankincense, if done by a non-kohen, is invalid. Let's describe the whole process. A person brings his mincha offering. So he brings the flour and the frankincense and is placed in a sanctuary vessel, the flour and the frankincense on the side of it. So that's the first sanctification of it already. Then a kohen will bring it, the holacha, to the corner of the mizbeach. At that point, he'll move the levona to the side because the kemitzah has to be only a flour, and he'll do the kemitzah. Good. Now he has the kemitzah in his hand. He places it in a second bowl. That's a second sanctification of that part, because that part is going to be burned on the mizbeach. And at that point, he will then go and take the levona from the big bowl and move it to the second bowl where the komets is, because that komets and the levona are both going to be burnt on the mizbeach. That's what we're talking about, the likut levona. So a kohen has to do that part. My ta'ama, what's the source? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah mishum holacha nagu ba. Rabbi Yirmiyah says this is part of holacha. The main part of holacha is carrying the big bowl with all the flour and the frankincense to the corner of the mizbeach. But this is also part of it. You're also moving. You're not moving your legs, but you're also moving a piece of something that has to be in another spot from the big bowl to the small bowl. So that's also part of holacha. And holacha has to be done by a kohen. So this also has to be done by a kohen. Kasavar holacha shelo beregel shema holacha v'holacha bezar pasul. Right now we're assuming that holacha, even without moving your legs, just moving something, is called holacha, and holacha, if done by a non-kohen, is pasul. Amar Rav Mari, afana nami tanena. Rav Mari is going to try to bring a proof for this thesis. We're going to reject the proof, but not necessarily reject the halacha of Rabbi Yanai. But here's the attempted proof. Zeh kilal kol hakometz v'noten bakli v'hamolich v'hamaktir. The proof is from the Mishnah that teaches any time someone does the kemitzah, or placing in the vessel, or bringing the vessel to the mizbeach, or burning the komets. If one does that with improper intention outside the time, it will be pigul. Okay, so it lists 4 different items here. Bishlam hakometz hainu shochet. So now we're going to try to bring a parallel between the 4 activities that are done for Korban Mincha and see how they're parallel to the 4 activities that are done for an animal sacrifice. So taking the kemitza is the same as doing shechita. In both, that's an act of separating that part that you're going to put on the mizbeach from the rest. And so that's equivalent. Molich nami hani molich. Now, bringing something close to from where it is to the mizbeach is the same in both. Maktir hainu zorek. Burning the komets is the same as sprinkling the blood onto the mizbeach. Both of those are the matir for everything else and have to be placed on the mizbeach. Ela noten bakli mai ka'avid. But taking the komets and putting it into a second vessel, what is that like? Where do we see something similar to that in an animal? Now, the obvious choice would be similar to Kabbalah. They're also in the Kabbalah. You're taking the blood from the whole animal, the blood that will eventually go on the mizbeach, and you're receiving it in a vessel. So too, you're taking all the flour and the komets, the part that will eventually go on the mizbeach, you're putting it into a special vessel. So it does seem very similar. But we say that the act is kind of different. Midameh. When in the case of the blood, it's going by itself. Once you do shechita, just from the blood pressure, it's squirting out, and you're just receiving it. You just stand there and just make sure to put the bowl in the right spot, and the blood will go into it by itself. Whereas here, in the case of the komets, you actually have to take it and then put it in physically. So it's a different kind of act. So maybe that makes a distinction. But nevertheless, it is the same. It is equivalent. Why? Not because the act itself is the same. One comes out by itself, one you have to put it in. But the point is that it's impossible to have a sacrifice without first receiving it. How are you going to have the komets and burn it if you don't put it into a vessel first? So since it's impossible to do it without putting it into a vessel, this is considered a significant act. But therefore, it is like Kabbalah, where also you have to receive it in the vessel in order to be able to have it, so you could bring it so that you could sprinkle it on the mizbeach. So even though it's not exactly the same in terms of the act that you're doing, it still functions to do something very significant as a stepping stone to do the next thing. And since it's necessary for the process, so they're both necessary for the process in a similar way. Okay, once we establish that, the one-to-one relationship doesn't have to mean that the act itself is the same exact thing, but rather that it's something necessary, so that in terms of the format of the flow, it's necessary, and that makes it equivalent to Kabbalah. So then we can say the same thing regarding the gathering of the frankincense, which would be included in holacha. Hachaname, kevan de la sagala, de la avadla, avoda chashuvahi, al korech meshvela ki holacha. Therefore here also, since you can't continue with the performance of the Korban Mincha without moving the frankincense from the big bowl into the second small bowl together with the komets, you have to move it in order to go to the next step. So therefore that's a significant act. Anything that's absolutely necessary, otherwise you couldn't do it, must be a significant step. And therefore we should say this is in fact part of holacha. Holacha has 2 parts. One, moving the big vessel of flour to the corner of the mizbech, and then also moving the frankincense into the small vessel. So you see, it's all part of holacha, and so he's proving from the parallel 4 activities of minchat, the parallel 4 activities of the animal sacrifice, that even though they're not exactly the same, but because anytime something is necessary for the next step, so then you say, well, that's a significant act, so this is a significant act, so we can include it in holacha. So that's a good proof, and since holacha has to be done by a kohen, this also has to be done by a kohen. But we reject this proof law. No, in fact, it could be that the moving of the frankincense is in fact similar to Kabbalah. You're receiving it, putting it in the right place. And that which you asked, that in that case, in one case of the blood, it's coming by itself, and here you have to take it and put it in. So what? Mikdidet tarvaihu kedushat kelihu. The point of both of them is actually the same, that you're sanctifying it by putting it into a vessel. It was already in a sanctified vessel, but just like with blood, you're putting it into that vessel, and that the blood is already sanctified at the time of shechita, but it gets a higher level of sanctification when you receive it in the vessel. So to here, the point is that you're by putting the chometz into a second vessel, you're sanctifying it, and then by putting the frankincense into that vessel, you're also adding to the level of sanctification. So in that sense, it is equivalent to kemitzah, it's equivalent to Kabbalah. Collecting the frankincense is similar to Kabbalah. Mali memela, mali ka shakil v'rameh, and it makes no difference if it's going by itself like the blood, or if you're taking it and putting it in. And therefore, no, there's no proof that it's like holacha. So this is a disproof. This is undoing the proof of Rav Mari, but it doesn't undo the basic law of Rabbi Yanai, because if it's not the same as holacha, okay, fine, it's not holacha, but it is Kabbalah. But Kabbalah also has to be done only by a Kohen. And so the point is that the halacha is established in either way, that the collection of the frankincense and putting it into the second bowl has to be done by a Kohen. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.